Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The Greenskins are born to fight, and it doesn't matter who they will be fighting, and that is definitely going to be the case today, as it is going to be a Greenskin civil war between Ondjage and lvzdy. Ondjage will be on the green side, and we'll have lvzdy on the red. So for the Greenskins being led by lvzdy, it is going to be a bit more of a standard army here. So we do have those Savage Orc Biggins for that front line. We do have a couple of Goblins for a nice little bit of chaff spread throughout. And we do have a to 8 peak loonies, pretty common pick in any matchup you're going to be seeing them in, and they are going to be having that Unbreakable, their Fanatics ability. We do have a Black Orc Big Boss, since it is going to be Azag instead, so that is going to get that AoE immune to psychology, keeping all of those guys in that fight for as long as possible. So we do have that Brass Cleaver giving 9 melee attack. We have that immune to psychology AoE around him, and of course he does have Get Back here, which gives another additional leadership, just keeping all of those trolls, which there is going to be a couple of stone trolls thrown into the middle of that thing. And for the Lord, it is going to be Azag the Slaughterer. It is going to be giving him a nice bit of mobility with him up on Skullmuncha, as he is going to be rolling in with Foe Seeker. We do have Doom and Darkness, really trying to leadership bomb the opponents. And then we do have Spirit Leech. We have Slaga Slashes giving plus 10 melee attack and plus 4 leadership in an AoE around him. And then Get On With It as well, giving even more leadership. So quite a bit of a leadership on both sides, going to be keeping it as high as possible and keeping it as low as possible on the opponents. We do have some Orc Biggins going to be supporting that front line, as it is going to be the couple of those Savage Orcs for the mobility department. We do have some Goblin Wolf Rider Archers with some Force Goblin Spider Riders and Morgrim's Mangy Marauders. The Goblin Wolf Rider Archer ROR, so they do have that armor piercing, especially good against stone trolls, even though they do have missile resist, and again, just kind of some other unit just whittling them down bit by bit. And we also have another Force Goblin Spider Rider for some nice bit of ranged poison spread throughout that front line, and then just some nice steady DPS throughout. Now for the army of lvzdy, it is going to be going quite wide, a lot wider than Ondjage. So if you just, I mean, in terms of counts, not so much, but just very spread out formation. And so we have Force Goblin Spider Riders with some Force Goblin Spider Rider Archers, but most of this is going to be the melee variant versus the range. So only one of the range going to be on the field. The rest is all going to be those melee. Now they will be able to just kind of screen out all of these guys, but they really won't have that, I guess, the saturation of poison that Ondjage's forces are going to be having for the rest of it. It is going to be Night Goblins throughout that front line, so there is going to be just a bunch of Night Goblins. No Savage Orcs, but it is also going to be very heavy in the Troll Toll, as we do have 3 of 4 of the regular ones. We do have some river trolls as well, but it is not going to be the ROR, which do have terror, so they are not immune to psychology, even though they do have that fear. And then we do have some stone trolls as well thrown into the mix, but there is going to be a bunch of regenerating units, and we aren't even going to be seeing Grom this time around. It is going to be a Warzag instead, who is getting Spirit Leeched fairly early. Now Warzag is only on foot, only sitting with 2800 HP left, and for his kit we are going to be seeing the Bonewood Staff, which is a very good item, which does give that additional melee attack and charge bonus when he is casting some spells. We have the War Point of Warzag giving some 6 physical resist, and then of course we do have Brain Bursta. We have Here We Go, which gives plus 40 melee attack, which is pretty considerable, and it is in an AoE. It is rather expensive, and Effigy of the Git for a nice little snare, keeping things where they are. But that is pretty much going to be it. We do have those 8 peak loonies, which are thrown into the mix, and then that is going to be it for both sides. So let's get things rolling, as lvzdy is actually able to get the top of the hill on the charge. All of those Night Goblins just a little bit quicker, but these Stone Trolls so very quickly getting routed off. But we do get a very nice Brain Burst here right into the middle of those Savage Orcs, bypassing all of that physical resist, and we do get an overcasted Doom and Darkness already being dropped down, and we are just going to be seeing all of lvzdy's troops just routing right off that charge. All of that leadership bomb from the Azag the Slaughterer, who does have that fear and terror, which is going to be just super critical here. And that is one thing lvzdy's army does lack, is that terror, as everything is just running from the hills so very early on, and everything just put to rout, even all of the Force Goblin Spider Riders. And I think this might be a very quick game here, as the forces from Ondjage do have the mobility to chase all of these trolls that are routing off, and even the stone trolls making sure that everything is going to be nice and routed. And so the rest of the core of the formation here is still sticking around, able to engage with lvzdy, these river trolls, and these night goblins, which do have the fanatics, so they will be able to just wreck shop right through this blob of the infantry. But I don't think it's going to be mattering at this point. Ondjage had a very just decisive initial engagement where everything just got routed off so very quickly. We do have some things are able to return, even though they were being chased off by like the Forest Scouts Spider Riders. We do have those trolls returning, and there is that Fanatics cast, which just rips through all these Savage Orcs and the rest of the infantry. The wad does go off though for the troops of lvzdy. And the balance power does inch its way just back a little bit. That Fanatics did do quite a bit of damage, but in comes lvzdy with that Fear and Terror, going to be routing off these river trolls, and now lvzdy is pretty much standing alone. All these Night Goblins really do need to get in and give him that infantry support, because without that, he will not be lasting long, especially with that Spirit Leech as well. I don't think lvzdy is long for this world. Everything else is doing a consistent job chasing things down. These stone trolls finally saying, yeah, we've done enough chasing, we'll be kind of heading on back. But there is one pocket of trolls and Forest Goblin Spider Riders, which is returning to the field here. Though at this point, with the loss of lvzdy, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of hope left for lvzdy here. There's just way too much strength left in Ondjage's forces with that leadership. The Fear and Terror from lvzdy is just going to be so important here. We do have returning stone trolls, and the rest of the stone trolls have just been constantly engaged in this fight, so they've just been racking up the value, even though they have been getting shots peppered in from these Forest Scouts Spiders. So this little pocket is getting poisoned down, and the poison from Ondjage is all just busy chasing things down, so that is a little bit of an advantage for lvzdy, is having that poison constantly saturating this center engagement. But with the return of the big bad stone trolls from the chase, this engagement's going to be going more and more against lvzdy as this time goes on, and I'm sure there's going to be another Doom and Darkness saved in that back pocket, especially with these two trolls getting pretty low. They are going to get terrified as well from lvzdy getting close, and they are going to rout off once again. And I think this time the forces of Ondjage are going to make sure that they stay routed off. And I think this is going to be just about it. Army losses is on the edge of the line for lvzdy, as Ondjage looking very, very strong in this first engagement. And that looks to be just about it, I think. I think just the loss of them. There it goes. There is army losses. Only the Night Goblins are going to be left on the field, since they are going to be unbreakable. And that will be all she wrote for game one. So a very quick first game between the Greenskins, but Ondjage does take it, so we'll update to that scorecard, as he is going to take game one, which is going to lead into game two. But that does also mean that the Greenskins are now off the field for both sides. A very interesting pick from lvzdy, and none of these were even the Fanatics. It was just the regular Night Goblins. The only Fanatics was the 8-peak loonies, so only one source of the loons. I think if you are going to be going the Night Goblin route, you do need to you have to bank on using all the Fanatics. Just kind of slowly use as many of them as possible while just keeping units in reserve. But they really did need Terror. I think you needed to take out the River Trolls and put in the Swamp Things, which do have Fear and Terror. If you do want to go the heavy troll route, you can still go with 4 trolls and a stone troll, but yeah, you need Fear and Terror if you are going in this lizard or greenskin mirror. It is a absolute must to have, and that is one thing that lvzdy was able to give to that fight, is that Fear and Terror, since all the trolls have that pretty low leadership, and that just leadership bomb early on just decimated lvzdy's forces, and there's enough mobility around to help chase things off. And even though the Forest Scouts Spiders, had they been in reserve initially, but they were routing themselves, so they weren't able to peel off the chasing units from Ondjage. I'll go over the values real quick on both sides before we do roll on into the next match here. But for lvzdy's trolls, they kind of didn't stand in that fight long enough to really generate any value, and as we're going to be seeing here, only one of them really getting even anything above 300. Everything else was just in and out of that engagement long before they were able to rack up anything. Even these Forest Goblin Spider Rider archers were able to generate more value than they were. And then just for the rest of the units, again, just not really enough staying power to rack things up. The AP Gloonies did do pretty well. They had some nice fanatics cast right through the mass of infantry on Ondjage's side. And then all the rest of the Night Goblins just did not last long enough. Warjage was able to get 1,500, so very nice Rain Burst is in there. I think that Warjage can be a good pick here, but you definitely need some more lasting power in that front line. Now on to Ondjage's side, Stone Trolls. One was able to generate a ton of value, getting 1,000. This was the one that was stuck in that engagement for the longest, while this one was off chasing down the routing trolls. The Warlords Mage Marauders were able to do quite well, as was the Force Goblin Spider Riders. Goblin Wolf Rider Archers, again, just getting some nice value. Even these guys getting 900 in total. I mean, when you are firing in against some nice low armored trolls, you are able to generate some nice, decent value. The Savage Orcs also able to get some good value, even at the Orc Big Guns. AP Gloons, on the other hand, got a little bit wrecked pretty early on, but otherwise, that is about it. Azag doing quite well, 1,200, and I mean, that is his damage value, and his value from that initial overcasted Doom and Darkness is, you cannot overestimate that enough. That was just a ton of value generated from causing the entirety of the Troll Corps of the lvzdy's army to rout it pretty much immediately, so that was very good value from him. And of course, that Fear and Terror is always very, very helpful. That is it for Game 1. Let's get on in to Game 2. The Norskins are right in the battlefield, and they're going to be charging headlong into the oncoming Lizardman horde. As we have Norska versus Lizardmen in this Game 2 matchup, we'll have Ondjage on the Norskins and lvzdy on the Lizardmen. So for the Norskin forces, we do have Marauders spread across that front line, and they will be backed up by a trio of Marauder Berserkers, one of which is the Brutes of the Hound. The Marauder Berserkers are a war, and these bad boys, they do have Unbreakable, so they'll be able to last all the way to the very bitter end. And then for the ranged units, we do have 3 Marauder Hunters with Javelins. They are a very strong anti-large unit, probably the best anti-large unit in the Norskin roster, as they do have that bonus versus large on their Javelins. And while they do lack that armor piercing, that bonus versus large usually more than makes up for it. But to add to that, we do have a Shaman Sorcerer of Metal who is coming in with Plague of Rust and the final transmutation. So that Plague of Rust paired with these Marauder Hunters with Javelins will be able to make those big dinos melt very, very quickly, even though they do have that high armor. Get rid of that armor, and these Javelins will do quite well indeed. For the Lord, it is going to be Wolfric the Wanderer. He is going to be coming in on horse, as he does have the Seafang, Hunter Champions, and Foe Seeker. Pretty standard kit for him. For the mobility department, we do have Norskin Ice Wolves spread throughout the field. We have 3 in total, and then we have Skin Wolves on both sides supporting them. One is the regular variant, and the other is the Maws of Savagery. The Skin Wolves armored ROR, so they do have a nice little bit of armor, able to tank some of that chameleon fire just a little bit better. And of course, they do have Frenzy to boot as well, which does give them that immune to psychology, which is quite helpful when they are going to be fighting those big dinos. And then for the Lizardman side, we are going to have some units vanguarded up front, so you have some Skink Skirmishers paired with some Chameleon Skinks here. While the Skink Skirmishers, they don't have that stock that the Chameleon Skinks do, so that might be giving away the position of those Skinks on that side. On the other flank, though, it is just going to be 3 of the regular Chameleon Skinks. Going to be getting some nice flanking shots, getting that poison, slowing down that Norskin advance as quickly as possible. And then for the center core, we do have double Bastillodons with solar engines. Going to be firing away. Now, this isn't necessarily the best map for them, as the rolling hills can provide some line of sight issues against the oncoming forces, and we are probably going to be seeing that with this Bastillodon, as it is going to be trying to target over this ridge. It's going to be having a little bit of a hard time at that. For the infantry, we do have Skink Cohort on both flanks, and then in the center, it is going to be double Saurus Warriors with the cohort of Sotex, the Red Crested Skinks ROR, and these guys are unbreakable, and they do have a nice ability that does cause or prevent their units from dying, which is the Refuse to Die. For the Lord, it is going to be Tehenoin. Tehenoin going to be charging on foot, no less. He's going to be bringing Flock of Doom, Transformation to Kadan, and it's going to be rather interesting seeing him here. lvzdy's showing some rather interesting builds for sure. On the mobility game, we do have Cold One Spear Riders, 3 of those in total. Going to be kept in reserve a little bit, trying to probably screen out anything that does try and charge into these Chameleon Skinks. And I think they do need to pull up ever so slightly. That is going to be for the armies, so let's roll on in, as the Norskin's going to be charging headlong into the maws of the beast. The Javelins taking some shots on the approach, but they should be able to get into range momentarily. And usually for the Lizardmen, you do see pterodons as well, which is what these Javs can do quite well against. But I mean, the Javs are also pretty much the counter to, or the pterodons are pretty much the counter to the javelins. Those rock drops can get a ton of damage in. We're already seeing that line of sight issue with the Bastillon firing right into the tops of that. But these Cold One Spear Riders do get a nice charge into these Norscan Ice Wolves, keeping them away from the skirmishers. But in come the Maws of Savagery, who are now going to be turning the tide in this engagement, going to be starting trading much better into those Cold One Spear Riders, especially considering they did get the charge here. On the other flank, we're seeing a very similar story as the Skin Wolves do get the charge into the Cold One Spear Riders, and the front line is about to get underway. We do see a transformation of Kadan coming in, but we also do see an overcasted Plague of Rust, and all of the javelins are now going to be focusing down that Bastillon with minus 60 armor. That is going to be making it only at 80. I mean, that is still a considerable amount, but it is far less than it normally would be, and that Bastillon is instead going to be electing to charge headlong into this engagement, trying to just bridge that gap, get them too close to really fire in. And that Feral Manticore, though, is going to be shutting down that Shaman Sorcerer Metal, and I don't think that Shaman's going to be getting anywhere anytime soon. We do see the Skin Wolves getting routed off by the Cold One Spear Riders, and on the other side, though, the Armored Skin Wolves did get the better of the Cold One Spear Riders, but both of the Spear Riders on the other side was too much for the Norskins to really hold back, and now they are going to be getting into that cookie jar, routing off all of the Javelins. I mean, the Javelins did generate some very nice value, getting one of the Bastillodons off the field, but not quite enough. They needed to be here for both of them, and to really just kind of pepper away at the Cold One Spear Riders as well. But the frontline engagement is going kind of a bit of a wash here. The Saurus Warriors are able to beat back some of the Berserkers, and there's just so many of the Marauders got kind of pushed back. We do see some Skin Wolves returning to the field. They still have 9 models left, and these Norscan Ice Wolves need to try and keep that Feral Manticore away from that Shaman Sorcerer Metal, try and keep it alive for it to use more Winds of Magic. Being out of the fight so early on would be quite the shame indeed. We do get some nice surrounds off on these Bastillons in that front line, as Wulfric is off chasing that Bastillon. We do have these Chameleon Skinks and the Skink Skirmishers off trying to chase them down. Marauders just kind of tanking more and more of that damage. Balance Power is in the Lizardman favor so far. Tehenwin has taken a bit of damage, but otherwise there's just so many Chameleon Skinks left, and the mobility is still in the advantage of the Lizardman, from what I can tell. But however, that is quickly changing as the Maws of Savagery are putting a major beatdown on these Cold One Spear Riders. The other ones are kind of coming in to try and assist, getting a nice charge into the flank here. And of course, that Bastillon firing in point-blank range as well. Might be doing a little bit of friendly fire, but we'll have that bonus against those Maws of Savagery who are on the verges of routing now. And with that Skin Wolf in particular gone, that is going to be one of the major units left to deal with the large units. I mean, the Javelins have returned, as has the Shaman Sorcerer, but there is still going to be another transformation of Kadan, or at least there should be another transformation of Kadan. And I blinked and I may have missed... no, there is Tehenwin still around. Very low in terms of HP, and I think he does want to try and get some more of his magic off. He's going to be getting, it looks like that is an overcasted final, or just a final transmutation. Just regular cast there, going to be doing a nice bit centered on Tehenwin, and it might be enough to finish him off. And seeing that cast go off, he does use the last of the Feral Manticore summons, and Tehenwin does survive it, and that he does get that Feral Manticore, which is probably going to be finishing off the Sorcerer now. I don't think there's going to be any really hope to keep that Feral Manticore away from him. And I think it does look like the Lizardmen are pulling ahead here pretty strongly in the late game. They have just so many units left. I mean, the Fear and Terror is also going to be just so hard to really deal with. Just getting close to a lot of these units is going to be enough to cause them to rout. And the Maws of Savagery, they will be able to do a little bit better against the Bastillodon. But still, I think it's going to be just a little too much armor to really chew through. And with all the assistance coming in, we have the Saurus Warriors, we have the Cohort of Sotek, all of these units are now converging upon the Bastillodon to help save it. And that Feral Manticore has finished off the Shaman Sorcerer. And Wulfric has been pretty much absent from this fight too. I think this was a mistake having him go and chase. It is going to get rid of the Bastillodon, but he has been completely absent from the fight from the get-go. His only job was chasing. I think he needed to use something else to chase. I mean, any of the Skin Wolves would have been a better option, or those Norscan Ice Wolves, but instead he has been elected to chase, and I think that is going to be one of the reasons why the front line went so sour for them. He wasn't able to use any of his Sea Fangs, and he did allow Tehenwin, who he should have been target priority number 1, killing off Tehenwin, but unfortunately that is not going to be the case, and the Lizardmen looking very strong, and I don't think there's any real good way for the Norskins to get back into it. There's just not enough left. I think all of this balance of power is pretty much solely on Wulfric's shoulders at this point. There are some Skin Wolves which are returning, and they are healing throughout this as well, but like the good Skin Wolves here, the Mods of Savagery, have been completely shattered. We do have some Marauder Hunters with Javelins coming back. They have a little bit of ammunition, but yeah, I just don't think there's enough tools necessary to deal with all of this. The Fear and Terror is going to be too much, and Wulfric, if he was on his Mammoth, that may actually be a different story, considering all of the Chameleon Skinks are pretty low in terms of ammunition. He would be able to wreck things pretty heavily, but with how he is right now, I don't think there's going to be a good way for him to come back. The Javelins do get pushed off. There's just way too many things left. Tehenwin very well could go down to these Norskin Ice Wolves, but yeah, again, Wulfric is a good lord and all, but he is not going to be able to take on this many units of the Lizardmen. So I think it is going to be only a matter of time. Skin Wolves are going to be trying to charge in. I think this is actually would be a good time for these Coldwind Spear Riders to really just turn and charge in, considering they are going to get charged themselves. If they get the charge here, they probably could get rid of these Skin Wolves, but as it is, it looks like they are going to get caught themselves, and that is going to allow these Coldwind Spear Riders to get taken out. We do get a kind of a last-ditch Sea Fang just trying to go through. It does hit some of the units, doing a little bit of damage, and almost hit those Coldwind Spear Riders, which actually probably would have caused them to rout, and they are able to take down these Coldwind Spear Riders, and the shots though from the Solar Bastillon landing in, hitting Wulfric right in the face, can be doing a nice bit of damage there, but the balance power is kind of edging a little bit back. As I think I mentioned before, I just don't think Wulfric's got it in him to really deal with everything that is left. Skin Wolves are going to be kind of pulling back, just trying to get a good engagement. Wulfric could be just continually taking shots though from that Bastillon. He's getting pretty low in terms of leadership, and all the Lizardmen have to do right now is just collapse and cause Wulfric to break, because as soon as Wulfric breaks, that is going to be curtains for the rest of the forces. The Skin Wolves take a little bit of damage from that Flock of Doom, but for the most part, they just go right on out of it. And here is that collapse against Wulfric, and Wulfric is going to be dropping very fast in terms of leadership. He is going to be able to rout off the Coldwind Spear Riders, but he himself is going to be routing here, and with him gone, that is it. That is going to be army losses. Norskins do fall to the Lizardmen, and lvzdy will even up the series as well. So let's take a look at the after battle report. We'll update the scorecard as well, as lvzdy does take this game. And let's see how things did. For the Norskin side of things, the Mods of Savagery did very well. They were able to get a nice bit of nice initial engagements, getting the charge on the Coldwind Spear Riders, causing them to rout, and that's exactly what they needed to do. The other side, though, I think going double armored may have been the better way to go. But the rest of the mobility, able to do some decent work. A couple of them getting over 600. The other one got crumped down pretty early on, but they did absorb that charge from the Coldwind Spear Riders, which allowed the Mods of Savagery to get their charge. The Javelins were able to get one good engagement volley in against one of the Bastillodons, but then they just got overwhelmed by the mobility on the Lizardman side. All of the Coldwind Spear Riders, after dealing with one of the Norskin flanks, just swept in, and that was a major rout for the Norskins. The rest of the forces, the Brutes of the Hound, were able to fight to the bitter end, able to generate some nice value in the meantime. The rest of the Marauder Berserkers did some decent work as well. However, the Marauders, on the other hand, got beaten down very quickly. Most of them did not even see that frontline engagement, instead just leaving the Berserkers to fend for themselves. Well, the Berserkers were able to hold their own fairly well. They just needed a little bit extra support to help kind of break it down the rest of the Lizardmen front line. The Shaman Sorcerer was able to survive for a time, but was still pretty beaten down by those two Feral Manticore summons. And then Wulfric the Wanderer, which was probably one of the biggest misplays in this fight. I definitely, instead of having Wulfric chase down the riding Bastillodon, I think one of the Norskin Ice Wolves or even the Skin Wolves needed to pull off and do that chasing themselves, because Wulfric was just really needed in that front line, and had he been around in that front line, he could have easily finished off Tehenwin, and with Tehenwin gone, that Shaman Sorcerer would have been around in that late game, getting some more Plague of Rust in, some final transmutations, and instead was shown the door rather early on. And for the Lizardman side of things, we had one of the Solar Bastillodons didn't get a whole lot of value, was routed off pretty early on. The other one was able to generate a nice bit on their own. And having that fear and terror by itself in that late game was exceptionally helpful, especially considering most of the Norscan roster do not have that immune to psychology. The Spirit Riders, all of them did very well, even the one that got beaten down pretty early on by the Maws of Savagery. It was still able to generate over 1,000 value, and all the Chameleon Skinks as well. It's just kind of as expected from them to get a lot of value. Skink Skirmishers did okay, even the cohort of Sotek getting 800, Saurus Warriors, decent work. Even the Skin cohort getting almost 600, and Tehenuin himself, those two summons were pretty valuable dealing with that shaman. And I'm pretty sure he is fairly cheap when he is on foot and only taking those two spells. So a little interesting build from the list, but it was able to pull out in the end. And that is going to be it for game 2. Let's roll on into game 3. Toddy is going to be flying on in all his glory in this Game 3 match between the Empire and the Dawi. We'll be having Ondjage on the Empire side of things, while lvzdy will be commanding the Dwarves. So for both sides, it is going to be a rather interesting deployment here for the Empire. They do have 4 great cannons spread all the way across the map here, so they are going to be very wide. So this is pretty much going to try and prevent the Dawi from getting on any individual one or all of them at the same time. And they do have some handgunners in the back line as well, pretty much to keep any like gyros from getting onto those great cannons. And we'll have some nice DPS at range as well. And then in both of the tree lines, we are going to be seeing some more handgunners, some spearmen, great swords, and demis no less. Demis going to be rolling on in. They do have armor piercing values themselves in melee, but they are a very risky pick because they are very expensive, and the Dawi just have so many tools to slow these guys down and just break them apart with either slayers, thunderers, or even cannons of their own. And of course, we do have Boris Todbringer. So Boris is coming in with that Foe Seeker. He does have Midland Runefang, which does give him that regen, which is why you see him over Karl in this matchup, because he has the armor piercing, and then this just allows him to sustain without the use of a life caster. And we do have Blood Roar as well, so -8 leadership around him. And he does, of course, it has that encourage aura. For the spellcasting, though, it is going to be an Amber Wizard, considering the Transformation Kadan is very helpful against the Dawi at disrupting their backline forces, getting onto any cannons or something like that for life. So they have that, and Flock of Doom for just a little bit extra DPS. Even though the Dawi are resistant to magic, just having a nice little bit of extra stuff once those 2 Manticores have been used is very nice. Some Empire Knights, some swordsmen, and another handgunner here in that tree line here. So really looking to kind of get the Dawi by surprise. Most of these units are going to be hidden, so they're just going to be seeing the artillery line. Now they should be aware that there is something either behind the trees or in the trees, so they're going to have to be mindful of that. But the Dawi is a bit more of a rush build, a rather large map to be trying that on. We do have miners with blasting charges in that front line, 4 of those, one of which is the Ekron's miners, which do have a nice little bit of extra damage for those blasting charges. And then we have some Dwarf Warriors behind them, so once those blasting charges have used up their ammunition, the idea is then the Dwarf Warriors will hold back the rest, while the Thunderers and the Quarrelers all do a nice bit of good work. We have some Longbeards on the flank as well. And the Quarrelers will do well against like just the state troops, and any of the handgunners on the opposing side, they'll trade rather well into that. They do have high armor themselves, 80, and Thunderers themselves have 80 as well. So that is probably one of the big problems that the Empire have, is just all of the Dawi forces have high armor, with the exception of the Slayers. And the Slayers will be in the backline, 3 of those, one of which is the Dragonback Slayers, and their job is to keep the backline safe against any of the approaching cavalry. Though there is a little bit of a blunder here by the Dawi, and that is the Rune Lord is going to be completely forgotten off into the flanks, but lvzdy has seen that, though it might be a little too late. Some of the Slayers are pulling off to try and get to that Rune Lord, but the Rune Lord does have that Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, which paired with the Slayers and all the range units really do help. And if Ondjage is able to jump onto that Rune Lord quickly with Boris, there he is out of range of any of the like the Thunderers and stuff, so he will be able to just kind of dive in and hopefully break this guy pretty quickly. But that'll be a pretty unfortunate misplay by lvzdy if that is going to be the case. The Slayer's going to be trying to converge, but it might be just a little too late to prevent all the damage from the Boris coming in, as Boris does dive down, getting a nice little hit in, and that leadership quickly taking, and I think lvzdy is over. Actually, yeah, he almost pulled away his Slayers. I thought he was going to leave that Rune Lord for dead, but the Slayers will be able to peel off Boris here. Boris is probably going to want him to be pulled back. He does not want to get bogged down to Slayers. Slayers are such a good anti-large unit, and he will be jumping right back into the air. So Crisis pretty much averted here. That Rune Lord will be able to regroup with the rest of his forces, but the rest of his forces have taken a bunch of damage early on. Those cannons are just singing sound and true as they are wrecking these Thunderers, and their front line as well is taking quite a bit of damage. So these guys are firing right down the line, more shots landing amongst the Thunderers, doing a lot of damage there, and there isn't enough of, like, I would want to say that the Dawi would like to kind of spread out and try and go for all of these, all of the cannons. And actually, these great cannons are being dropped right now and pulling their crew back as the dwarves do get close. So, not wanting to lose even a single one of these artillery pieces, the great cannons are going to be dropping back, as is the rest of the forces just kind of slowly kiting them away. So these guys are going to be pulling back, trying to pull the Dawi to the other ones, and then they'll rejoin their artillery pieces, while the forces in the tree lines are going to be just kind of pulling apart the Dawi formation. And once the Dawi formation has been pulled apart, that is when these demis are going to be striking, and strike they are. They're going to be announcing themselves from the tree line, and there isn't anything close by to really do anything about it. However, Boris does have that Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin popped on him, and these Thunderers are going to be pointing their attention towards the sky, doing a nice bit of damage early on, but this charge from the Demis Crystallites is just brutal against those Quarrelers. The Thunderers are turning their attention towards them, but it's going to be a little late on the draw there, as the Slayers as well trying to get into the backline. The Slayers did get kind of pulled apart here, just trying to chase things down, get into the backline. That is what the Slayers in the front have pulled forward to do, is just try and chase things down, because they are unbreakable, so that there will have a relentless pursuit, but that is going to leave the rest of the formation very open to those Demis, which I think the Dawi may not have seen them early on, not expected to see those Demigryph Knights on the field, and so instead they only have one Slayer left to really kind of keep them in check, and the Demigryph Knights should be able to kind of run free. And now they don't have that Lore of Life to keep them topped off, and they are taking a ton of damage from these Thunderers, which is kind of one of the big threats. Already down to 20 models, and their HP has fallen considerably, and the tree engagement, I guess, is going to be underway, as the great swords are going to be just taken out these miners. Boris is going to be here to support as well, and we do have some handgunners to fire, but the handgunners is going to be pretty obstructed from all these tree line, and once these great swords have dealt with these miners, they'll be able to deal with these dwarf warriors, and we do have the Demigryph Knights as well, kind of getting some nice charges in as well. And if we take a look at the rest of the engagements, the handgunners have emerged from the tree line, as they are going to be just kind of getting some nice damage in. These miners taking another charge from those Empire Knights, and here is that transformation to Kadan, trying looking to slow down the Dawi approach even more so. But the Slayers have done a good job of herding the Great Cannon crews away from their other artillery pieces, so they will not be able to get back on those anytime soon, and they are just relentlessly pursuing them. So it is up for grabs really at this point on who's going to be winning here. Traditionally, this is a very Dawi favored matchup, but the Empire has taken a very unorthodox approach, and it seems to be paying off rather well. The rest of the Great Cannon crews have been dropping their own artillery, so they again are going to be retreating back into the tree line, hoping that the Dawi will forget about them so they can rejoin the battle at a later time. Being very cautious with those guys, and that Feral Manticore a little confused right now, just doing a little circles on the field, just trying to keep these Longbeards at bay, trying to free up these handgunners once again to fire away. And this tree line engagement has gone very well for the Empire, though. If we're going to swing back over here real quick, all of the Dawi forces in these trees have been completely routed off, and that is going to now open up the door for a very brutal rear engagement, as they're going to be charging forward, trying to pull their attention back. The second Feral Manticore has been used, and that is going to be both of them. So now it's just going to be Flock of Dooms and some nice blasting charges, just decimating these spearmen. Two of them cross-firing away, taking them down to half health right off the bat. Feral Manticore trying to dive in, a little too late to be stopping any more charges in. That Ekron's miners do have quite a bit more ammunition, so it is still worthwhile to get on top of them. But now the handgunners are free to fire, as these Longbeards just trying to get onto these handgunners, and they are going to be sandwiching them between the Slayers here, as the handgunners trying to pull back towards the other line, but they are going to be caught out. So that might be just one of the handgunners off the field, and the rest of the Slayers are just relentlessly pursuing these Great Cannon crews. One of them has taken a bit of damage, and the handgunners retreating into the tree line going to be able to fire out of that still just fine. There's going to be plenty of targets to be opening up against, and the Dawi, though, have reformed their lines pretty effectively. I think, yeah, the Empire, they either needed to sit even farther back with their great cannons, because all of the great cannons now are completely silenced, even though most of the crews are still around. They aren't going to be able to get onto their artillery pieces anytime soon. Rest of the forces, while they did get a nice engagement in the trees, these Slayers are just relentlessly pursuing everything that is left, and there is no good way to deal with them. If you had like crossbowmen, archers, they might be able to do some decent damage, but the handgunners instead are just going to be trying to peel off whatever they can, freeing up these great cannons crew, who are now they might have that possibility of getting back onto these artillery pieces, and I think that is exactly where these guys are going. These back two units are completely open, so if they can get back onto them, and it's going to be a long trek to do so, but they can pull that off, as Boris already is almost at his healing cap. He has taken a ton of damage. It has been rather slow in the making, but he is at his healing cap, and he does get that Master Ruin of Wrath of Ruin with these Slayers to boot, and all of just the range units starting to pepper him down. He is going to be taking a ton of damage here, and this is not going to be damage that he's going to be able to heal through, considering he is at his healing cap. Handgunners trying to get as much DPS in across the board, as they are getting some nice crossfire into these Longbeards and to these Slayers, but that is just a ton of damage going Boris's way, and I think we are going to see him. He does end up routing, so he should be able to pull free of those Slayers, and he is getting rather close to the edge of that line, though, and he may very well just route right on off. Balance power now heavily in the Dawi favor, though the battle is not lost just yet. These Great Cannon crews would very much like to get onto the artillery pieces, but seeing that both of these miners are going to be turning their attention towards them, and I don't think those Great Cannon crews are going to be seeing their artillery pieces anytime before the end of the battle, and things are looking mighty grim. Though Boris does return to the field, and that is going to be helping the Empire side just a bit, but there's still just so much range units left, and there's not enough pressure to put onto the back line. All the Great Cannon crews, they just not use up enough of their ammunition, and even the Amber Wizard now running into, or actually was running just right past that Rune Lord, just trying to get into the Thunderers to shut down anything and everything if they can. But yeah, there's just way too much. The only thing is that they're all really condensed, so if the Empire Knights, which they might still be around, it looks like they are still running away from the Slayers there. These Empire Knights they need to come back in. They need to get into these Corlers, into these Thunderers. Same with the Demigryph Knights, they just need to get into those engagements, shut down the range units. If they are able to shut down the range units, they can pull this fight back, but they need to do that. They have been able to get away from the Slayers, so the Slayers are all well, I say that, and here are the Dragonback Slayers pretty close by, and they are going to be providing a bit of a deterrent, but they are idle for now, and that will allow Boris and these Demis to shut down these Thunderers, though of course that is still going to free up all the Quarrelers to just be firing in, and at this point this would be exactly when those Empire Knights would love to be in, and here they come charging forward, though the Dragonback Slayers are going to be able to probably pull off Boris and these Demigryph Knights, but they have done quite a bit of damage to the range units so far. The Amber Wizard trying to get the attention of these Thunderers, but to no avail, as Boris is getting lit up in the sky. He does have that Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin popped on him, and I think Boris is going to be going down here. Another volley should be enough to seal his fate, and with him gone, that is going to be one of the larger stopping powers for the Empire. They still have the Demigryph Knights, they still have the Empire Knights, who get a nice charge into the miners, but I think it's going to be just a little too late, as Boris does finally fall down. The Demis have actually probably done some fairly decent work. I don't know if they've been able to quite pay for themselves, but the Empire does fall, and the Dawi do take this third match, giving lvzdy the lead 2-1. So I'll update the scorecard as well. And now it is going to be do or die for Ondjage, as he does need to win the last two battles if he does want to progress in the final knockout stage. So let's take a look at the after battle report. So for the Empire side, Boris really did not do all too well, only getting 500 in total damage value, and he was pretty much the focus of all of the range units from the Dawi, and they did do quite well at that. Very unorthodox build. It almost kind of paid off, but it just how the battle went. All of the great cannon crews were just kind of pushed off at the same time, and and then they were silent for the rest of that fight. Demigryph Knights were able to get 900, but still not quite enough to really pay for themselves. Great cannons, while they got some nice initial value in, it just wasn't quite enough. There's not enough time to really fire away, even though the map was quite large. The Dowie were able to get into them quickly enough to really push them back, and really the Slayers did a good job at that. They're able to just continually just put that pressure on, and all of them, 1,000 on these guys, 1,000 on the Dragonbacks, and 1,300 on the other one, they all generated a ton of value between them. And then all just the heavy armor was just enough to really just sustain the rest of the forces very well, even though like the miners, they didn't really generate a ton of value. Just having them around is just made the Empire slowly try and grind through them. And they just didn't have that capacity to do so. They only had one of the great swords who got some decent value and just wasn't enough in the end. And the Thunderers, paired with that Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, did do quite well. And that was almost courting with disaster, though, early on, though the Rune Lord was able to regroup with some of its Slayers. So that initial lapse of attention on the deployment was able to be mitigated, and actually proved to be a big difference here in that fight. All of those Runes of Wrath and Ruin were used against Boris, and that just allowed all the Thunderers to just light him up, and they generated quite a bit of value from that. But that's it for Game 3. Now we are going to be into Game 4. It is match point for lvzdy, so if he is able to pull off one more win, he will be advancing. But let's move on in to Game 4. Once again, the Dowie are going to be taken to the field, but this time they are going to be up against the forces of chaos as they try and stem the tide rushing down from the chaos wastes. So we have the Dowie will be on Ondjage's side this time, and lvzdy will be commanding the chaos forces. And for the Dowie army, it is going to be a rather light in terms of the raw infantry. Instead, we are going to be seeing 4 miners with blasting charges, going to be looking to wreck any of the Marauders. Now, they won't do quite as much work against any like Chaos Warriors, for example, but against just the regular Marauders, they will make quick work of them. And it is just the regular miners. It is actually 5 in total. And then they will be backed up by a pair of Thunderers, a Great Cannon crew, or a Cannon crew, not the Great Cannons, that is the Empire force. And then we do have a couple of Giant Slayers as well, a very, very strong anti-large. They have armor piercing. They'll be able to make quick work of any of the large units from the Chaos side. They are very scary to be facing, considering they are unbreakable as well. And then in the tree line, we have the Dragonback Slayers, who do have that slow when they are able to get some damage off on the enemy. We have a Rune Lord coming in with that Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and in the sky, we do have some gyrocopters with the brimstone guns, 2 of those, and they will be able to get some nice DPS in as long as they are able to stay and fire. On the flanks, we do have some Longbeards though, so a nice little bit of high armor. So they have 100 armor there. They have very high leadership as well, so they'll just be trying to hold back those flanks for as long as possible, and then some Dwarf Warriors in the very back line. That is it for the Dowie. For the Chaos side, we do have some Marauder Horsemen. A couple of those are the throwing axes, and those throwing axes will actually do some decent work against those gyrocopters as long as they are able to get nice and close. But in addition to that, there is going to be 2 Chaos Feral Manticores, and they'll have 1 Feral Manticore per gyrocopter, which will be able to keep them at bay and keep them away from more of their more important stuff, like their caster, for example, their chariots, which they are going to be bringing some of those. So we do have the Gorbius chariots, which does have that bonus versus infantry and armor piercing, everything you can need and want for the Dowie. And then we do have a regular Chaos Chariot as well, which does lack that armor piercing, but is still bonus versus infantry. And the chariots are always nice and useful against them, getting into that back line, shutting down those range units. But a little off pick here, we are going to be seeing a couple of Chaos Trolls. Now, they do have low leadership, low armor, but they do have 100 weapon strength, which is armor piercing, which is quite useful against them, but they are very susceptible to that range fire, so they will have to be rather careful with that. And they will be approaching through the tree line, which will be able to mitigate most of that incoming fire against them. And then for the rest of the forces, it is going to be Chaos Marauders and with Chaos Marauder great weapons for that front line all the way spread out. No Chaos Warriors here, just the Chaos Marauders going very wide in that department, and they will need to be very mindful of those miners with blasting charges because they will take a ton of damage from them. And for the Lord, it is going to be Prince Sigvald the Magnificent, a very hard target to snipe out. He does have that 110 armor, and he is going to be coming in with that auric armor, which gives him that regeneration, as well as the slippery, which always gives plus 24 melee defense, a heroic killing blow, which gives him that little bit of a buff to his armor piercing and base weapon damage to allow him to really dish out the damage to the Dawi forces. And luckily for him, it is just a rune lord, because I think Grombrindal does actually beat Sigvald in melee. He does have standard die as well for plus 24 melee defense and leadership in an AoE around him. For the spellcasting, it is going to be a cast sorcerer of metal on foot again, just trying to mitigate as much of the incoming fire as possible to avoid that cannon shots. He does have transmutation of lead, plus or minus 30% base weapon damage and minus 24 melee attack in an AoE, and Plague of Rust, which is very helpful against the Dawi, reducing that armor. And that is going to be it for both sides. So let's get things in moving, as the gyrocopter is going to be pushing forward, and they are going to be only able to last so long because all of these Marauder Horsemen are getting very close, which will be able to push them back. They are trying to get some shots into Prince Sigvald, and I think most of those shots would be better targeted going against that Chaos Sorcerer Metal, or just trying to rampage these Chaos Pharaoh Manticores once they are closer to their own range units. And I think that's pretty much what they're going to have to do, is just kind of pull back, get into that Thunderer support, even the Great Cannon support, who in the Great Cannons, while all these Marauder Horsemen are chasing these gyrocopters, those cannons are singing, and they are just tearing through this tightly packed unit of Marauder Horsemen, as all three of these units are just together, which is just going to be a nice saturation for all of these fires. But unfortunately, the gyrocopter has been chased back away from its own unit, though all of the tools necessary to deal with that gyrocopter are focusing on that, which is going to allow the other gyrocopter to get directly overhead more of its key units, and it is going to be trying to go after that Chaos Sorcerer Metal. The Dragonback, or the Giant Slayers, are going to be charging down through the forest, trying to get onto these Chaos Chariots, but these Chaos Marauders will be keeping them at bay. But those miners with blasting charges are going to be doing a nice bit of work against these Chaos Marauders. But once the Chaos Marauders are engaged melee, especially with these Gorby's Chariots just charging on forward, we do get the Giant Slayers coming in, and the Thunderer Fire just lighting up these Gorby's Chariots. And this is probably where I'm going to be seeing, actually there is that Master Rune of Rathrune on the regular chariot, which is going to allow these Dragonback Slayers to get on top of them, and these Gorby's Chariots are just getting melted. These Giant Slayers are doing a ton of damage to them, and also all of these Thunderers are just absolutely lighting these guys up. And these Gorby's Chariots not lasting too much longer. It is down to just two, and they might be losing another model, no less, before the end of things. And we do get, it looks like, a Plague of Rust going to be going down onto the Dragonback Slayers. I think that was a bit of a misclick. I think they're trying to get on top of the miners, because Dragonback Slayers, they don't have any armor to start with, so you're not really losing anything out of that. But we do get that transmutation of lead, which does reduce that base weapon damage and melee attack, which will kind of try and save things up. But the Chaos Trolls quickly getting broken down there. So the loss of the Gorby's, the Chaos Trolls, and by the looks of things, these Chaos Chariots are on their way out as well, trying to get onto those Thunderers. But just all of the Giant Slayers, just a little too much, I think, for these Chariots to really deal with. And the Chaos Marauders with great weapons are able to get onto these cannons, and they are whittling through these miners with blasting charges fairly well. However, these Longbeards are holding a lot better than the rest. They just outclass even these Chaos Warriors with great weapons just a little bit too much. The Gorby Chariots has returned. They do have two models left, but they are still going to have to deal with these Slayers one way or the other. Some of the miners using up the last of their ammunition, getting a little shots into their own cannon crew, but the cannons have pretty much done their job at this point. The Chaos Forces have pushed pretty far into their back line, and these Longbeards holding back against these Marauders, but those Chaos Trolls will be able to beat them down quite well. We do have some more Marauder Horsemen throwing axes returning to the field, and I haven't really seen any of the gyrocopters anytime soon, but they are still alive and well with full ammunition. These Chaos Pharaoh Manticores have been keeping them busy throughout the fight, and the Dawi are just trying to just kind of continually fall back, trying to get these Thunderers just free to fire. But Chaos has done a pretty good job at just kind of keeping that pressure on, but the roaming Slayers and the Giant Slayers have just proved a little bit too much. And there it is, point blank range into the Scorby's Chariot with that Master Rune of Rathrune. They are slowed down to a bitter crawl, And that is going to be all she wrote, I think, for them. One model left on slivers of HP, and the Chaos Marauders as well going to be routing. And we do have, I believe this is a transmutation of lead once again, hitting these forces, just trying to reduce the effective battle power of these Giant Slayers. And they are doing a ton of damage as the Chaos Paramedic are now diving on top of the Rune Lord, trying to get rid of him, but already having used at least 2 of the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, as we do get that Plague of Rust overcasted, just trying to get rid of him as quickly as possible, especially with Prince Sigvald in support. But the Thunderers are just lighting up these Feral Manticores, rampaging them down. Now already engaged in melee, not going to be too big of a problem, but with these Slayers now coming down, that is going to make it unable to really pull on out. No, it does rout, and it does run out of that engagement, though the other one then in turn rampages itself right into these Slayers, and that Slayers are going to make quick work of them, especially with these Gyrocopters now pretty much free reign to fire. There is none of their counters really left on the field, and I think that is going to be it for the Forces of Chaos, and I think the Dawi going to be cruising forward to a pretty comfortable finish here. They did have a bit of pressure put on them throughout the course of the fight, but overall, I think the Dawi did have all the tools necessary to really deal. I mean, those Giant Slayers, they just did so much work, and at this point, it's like they're pretty much unkillable at this point. Prince Sigvald is pretty much going to be getting routed off to army losses by the looks of things. There's just too many Dawi forces left, and all of the Slayers unbreakable. They are able to rout off the Rune Lord, but at this point, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. There's plenty of Thunderer ammunition left as well, so that's just going to be able to make sure things are dealt with once and for all. The Gyrocopters doing some nice crossfire against the Chaos Feral Manticore should be able to get it down to its second rampage point pretty early on. I think a single volley from the Thunderers will be able to do that. And I think, yeah, it's just the beginning of the, or not necessarily the beginning, it is the end of the end for the Forces of Chaos. We're hitting right on the edges of army losses, and I think that is going to be just about all she wrote for this game. Manticores are going to be routing off, and that is going to be army losses. Prince Sigvald unable to sustain against all of these forces, and that is going to be that. Dawi do take game 4, which is going to be forcing a final game of the series. It has been a long slog throughout, but it is down to the final game. So let's take a little look at the after battle report. We'll update the scorecard as well. 2-2 going into game 5. Winner takes all, and we'll be advancing to the round of 32 in the final playoff bracket. So let's take a look at the Forces of Chaos first. So they had all the tools necessary to deal with them. I think the Feral Manticores, they are a little bit wasted chasing down all the Gyrocopters, especially considering they weren't able to really finish them off. And then all the Marauder Horsemen with throwing axes, they got too grouped up early on. They needed to stay a little bit spread out because the cannon crews just lit up that just mass of cavalry, and they just did a ton of damage to there. I mean, we'll take a quick look at that. They were able to get 556. I mean, it's not that great, but it was enough to really eliminate a lot of the threat from these throwing axes early on, and then paired with all the range units as well. If we take a look at the Trolls, that was probably one of the biggest downsides to this. I was like, it's a good idea in concept because they just have the armor piercing, they have regen, but they just get taken out of the fight so early on. I mean, Slayers are just such a great counter. You're almost always going to be seeing Slayers. I mean, they saw Giant Slayers this time, so that was even a step up amongst what you normally will see. Gorbeast and the regular Chaos Chariot, again, not doing all too well. However, the Chaos Marauders with great weapons did do some decent work. They were able to survive those blasting charges fairly well, considering the great weapons are a lot more spread out versus the regular Marauders, so they are able to tank that miners with blasting charges just a little bit better. Can't say that about the Chaos Marauders, though. They do have that nice tightly packed formation. And then Prince Sigvald, unfortunately, while he was pretty much at full health here, those army losses did trigger, and he really wouldn't have been able to pull through anyways. Both of those Thunderers were alive. All of the Gyrocopters had pretty much all of their ammunition left, so there was plenty of range units. All the Dawi had to do, even if he was unbreakable, is just spread out, and that was been a crossfire, and he would have been dying very quickly at that point. Now, for the Forces of the Dawi, the Gyrocopters were able to generate some decent value later in the game, and the Thunderers themselves did a ton of value as well. 1,000 on these guys, 800 on them, and then the Giant Slayers, 1,500 and or pretty much 1,500 on both of these guys. Man, Giant Slayers are just so strong. They are expensive though, but they can pay for themselves quite quickly. Even the Dragonback Slayers getting 1,500 themselves. So the Slayers, the Thunderers doing a ton of work, and even the Longbeards are able to hold that line fairly well. Miners with blasting charges, unfortunately, they did get broken down pretty quickly, though they did able to get some nice shots in. Rune Lord, some nice runes of Wrath and Ruin, but of course he's not going to be getting any value from him. But that is it for Game 4. Let's go into the final match of the series. We've made it this far. Let's go to the end. So let's see how it goes. Janky Skaven Engineering is going to be coming to the field here. Going to be held together by Warpstone, Nuts and Bolts, and a few Skaven slaves. And for the Skaven, going to be led by Ondjage, they are going to be facing off against the undead as the vampire counts do stride forth in mass. And they will have quite a few Skaven to get through as well, though. But for the Skaven side, it is going to be Skaven slaves for that front line. Going to have those spears going to be holding back as long as possible, allowing the weapons teams to get that damage in. As we do have rattling guns, we have poison wind globadiers, and we do have warp lightning cannons going to be firing away already. They are going to be targeting some of that vampire counts cavalry. We do have a plague priest. Rolling in, does have that Mortis Engine effect up on the Plague Furnace, and does have some nice little spells to boot. Has the Pestilent Breath, the bound one on that, and then just going to be bringing Vermintide for going the Plague Monk summons, just be getting a little bit extra chaff units onto the field. And then for the Lord, it is going to be Throt the Unclean. Throt's going to be rolling in with a couple of his own Rat Ogres, but for his abilities, he does have the Master Controller, which gives +4 leadership and +5 melee defense in an AoE around him. He does have Remoldered, which gives a nice little bit of a healing to any of the Molder monsters, which is himself, both of the Rat Ogres, for example. Get some nice heals to them. We have Creature Killer, +16 bonus versus large for the units around him, and especially when paired with that beast pack, that Rat Ogre summon, can definitely make some quick work of any of the large targets from the vampire counts. For the rest of the forces, we do have the Council Guard, the Storm Vermin with halberds. They are unbreakable. They do have Guardian to boot as well, so especially when they are paired with that Plague Priest or Throt, going to make them even harder to bring down. Clan Rats for that secondary line. We do have some Warp Grinders as well to just kind of keep these Warp Lightning Cannons nice and safe, because they do have that snare and that warp quake. We do have the Pit Fighters of Hell's Deep, so they do have the Berserk ability with a regular Rat Ogre, and that is going to wrap things up for the Skaven side of things. For the Vampire counts, we do have a couple of Dire Wolves Vanguard deployment in the far corner, looking to get onto some of those weapon teams nice and quickly. But for the rest of the forces, we do have Heinrich Kemmler. He's going to be coming in on horseback. Heinrich Kemmler does have quite a few abilities himself, so go over those real quick. So he does have the Chaos Tomb Blade. Now so when he is engaged in melee, he is going to be giving an additional +8 hit points per second, and that does actually resurrect the dead paired with the Master of the Dead. So that is a ton of passive healing for Heinrich Kemmler, though he does have to be very careful. He's getting a little ahead of himself. Throt the Unclean will make quick work of him, so they do have to be very careful with that. Now we do have Invocation of Nehek. We have Van Hal's Dance Macabre, as well as Raise Dead. We do have Undeath Resurgent, giving +16 leadership and melee defense in an AoE, and of course he does have Krell. For his support, he does have double White Kings. Both of those do have that Scab's Wrath to just kind of mow through the very lightly armored Skaven infantry. And then we do have Skeleton Warriors for the front line. We do have a couple of zombies on the far flanks, and then in the back line it is going to be Crypt Ghouls, and they are a very nice unit to be having here because they can just chew through the Skaven front line very quickly to get into that back line. And foregoing any of the very expensive units, so none of the Grave Guard or anything like that, though we do have some expensive cavalry. We have some Black Knights, and then there is going to be the Blood Knights. They're very expensive, very elite cavalry. Now these guys do very well against like Hell Pits, for example, like that, and they will do trade very effectively into the Rat Ogres, and there are going to be a pair of those on both sides, but they are going to be the target of that Warp Lightning Cannon early on. And Heinrich Kemmler in a tough spot, so let's get things rolling as this engagement is already underway. Heinrich Kemmler needs to get the hell out of there. He does not want to be anywhere close to Throt, and he's going to need to pull out. The two White Kings going to be trying to charge forward, but Heinrich Kemmler is just taking a ton of damage, and now the Rattling Guns as well going to be firing away at point blank. He does get a little bit of an invocation, but that was damage he did not need to be taken. He does need to be quite careful, but man, these Blood Knights on the flank are just taking so much damage from that Warp Lightning Cannon, and they definitely need to be very cautious so far, as they are going to be trying to get a nice surround off onto the Skaven formation, though the Skaven have already traded very well early on, getting some nice damage in. Throt can be getting another nice little charge, not doing any damage to the White King, but it is going to be kicking it back in its own lines, and the vampire counts really need to start collapsing upon the Skaven formation, pull their attention all which directions, but these Blood Knights, already down to 15 models, are on slivers of HP, as that Warp Lightning Cannon has pretty much already paid for itself. That damage dealt so far. Rattling Gun's going to be opening up, and soon the Poison Wing Globadiers are also going to be making quick work of the front line. Though once the front line is engaged, it is Skeleton Warriors and Crypt Ghouls, and they will be able to win out against anything that isn't the Council Guard, so they should be able to kind of push forward. Once again, Heinrich Kemmler is taking the hit from Throt, needs to stay away from Throt at all costs, at least stay close to like his 2 White Kings, who can potentially do some decent damage against him. And the one thing that the Vampire Count's army I think is lacking is a bit of that mass. I traditionally like bringing some Crypt Horrors just to be able to kind of push through. We are getting that collapse now. Dire Wolves and those Crypt Ghouls collapsing upon the Poison Wing Globadiers, also charging into these Warp Grinders, getting some nice damage in, but there is that Warp Quake sizing up the Dire Wolves, the Blood Knights, who do get an invocation of the Heck, trying to keep them in that fight, but this isn't the Warp Quake, just the Snare. But these, like the Dire Wolves, getting collapsed down by the Pit Fighters and Throt, making quick work of them. So some nice catches in the back line by the Skaven, but the Skaven formation is just in tatters right now. If we just look across the field here, all of the counts is just streaming into that back line. There is not a whole lot left to really hold back the tide of the counts. They do have the Council Guard, which will be able to provide a nice bit of anchor for the formation. They are sitting pretty decent, but they are quickly dropping in terms of HP as well. I mean, Blood Knights, Black Knights, everything is just collapsing in. These Rattling Guns have been taken out of the picture. When we do get that Rat Ogre summon here, just trying to hold back the tide of the Undead, as the Undead are actually taking the advantage in the balance of power, as everything is just like going wrong for the Skaven for the most part. It's just that front line just unable to hold. The Plague Priest trying to pull back to its own units, as it does have that Mortis Engine effect, but both of the White Kings doing a decent amount of damage, as the Black Knights do stream into the backline once again, just again collapsing upon the Pit Fighters of Hell's Deep, though the Blood Knights have taken a bunch of damage and are continuing to take that, as they're just trying to get healed up by Heinrich Kemmler. And Heinrich Kemmler himself is actually at his healing cap, having to be forced to use a lot of invocations on himself, and he is just trying to stay engaged in melee to just provide as much passive healing as possible. And there is just so much undead left on the field here. The only thing that's really holding is the Council Guard. Unfortunately, the Council Guard are not engaged or around that Plague Priest, as the Plague Priest is just trying to drain everything. But the only plus side, I think, for the Skaven at this point is the Blood Knights took so much damage on the initial approach that the Plague Priest and Throt is sitting a little bit more safe. There's not a whole lot of tools left to really deal with them, and you do have the White Kings, which will be able to do a nice bit against like the Plague Priest, for example. But Krell is also being summoned in here, and Krell, on the other hand, is a very strong anti-large duelist, and I think the Skaven need to try and regroup with their Council Guard at this point. They need to avoid Krell at all costs. They cannot afford to duel with him, because Krell will put a major amount of damage onto any of the large targets for the Skaven, like the Plague Priest, a Throt, to any of the Rat Ogres, as he has been able to take out these Pit Fighters of Hell's Deep, causing them to rout, as the balance of power is now pretty strongly in the Undead's favor, as everything is just slowly whittling through the Council Guard. I mean, there's just so many units, though, just focused on these Council Guard, that the rest of the forces are kind of being left to their own devices. Though at this point, there isn't really a whole lot of need to try and have all that mass infantry. It's just trying to bring down the Plague Priest, bring down Throt, and they are trying to pull back to their Council Guard. And if they are able to regroup, that will give them that Guardian to both of these, allowing them to sustain, and that will also allow them to just continually drain down all these units. And you can just see that ability going off on all of these units, that green filth just continually applying its damage to all of the undead. And the Plague Priest got very low to almost routing there for a second there, but it is able to regain some of its leadership, and it's now going to be charging into melee with these Skeleton Warriors. Not a whole lot of threat to be had against that Plague Priest once it is engaged over here, and Throt just trying to deal with as many of this undead as possible. Heinrich Kemmler is getting quite low, but the White Kings trying to hound that Plague Priest for as much as they can, but it is just a long slog of a fight. Balance power is actually going back into the Skaven's favor, as more and more of the undead is going down, and especially with Heinrich Kemmler as well. Just Throt has been relentless in his pursuit of Kemmler throughout the course of the fight, and the White King is kind of off to its own devices, not really a whole lot of use being there. And I think the Krell has finally dissipated, and that is one of the bigger threats to the Skaven gone from the field, and that is going to definitely allow the Skaven to breathe a nice sigh of relief there. Heinrich Himmler is in critical binding. I think he was crumbling, but he is able to regain his leadership, though he is only at 174, though he is crumbling now, especially with Throt in hot pursuit. And I think that is going to be the end of Heinrich Himmler, as he does try and get a summon down, but it is going to be a little too late, as he does get taken out of that picture, and it is now just down to the drain of that Mortis engine from that Plague Priest, and Throt, who is still at very high health. He has some healing left. If we take a quick look at that, he still has, he has a lot of healing left. He has 2,500 heals left in healing to go, so I think it is going to be very hard for the Vampire Counts to really deal with them. The Council Guard still have 24 models left, and as long as a single one of them still survives, that is going to be giving the Guardian to Throt and the Plague Priest, and so the Scab Wraith tries to deal as much damage, but it is only the Council Guard, Throt, and the Plague Priest left. There is still, I think, a few units left on the fringes here. We have the Pit Fighters, the Hell's Deep, and the Black Knights trying to just kind of clean things up on the flank, just keeping things from returning. But that Plague Priest, I think, actually, at this point, it is probably a good idea to pull that back, go back towards those Black Knights, because it is just the two White Kings and the Summon of Zombies, and Throt should be able to deal with those two White Kings by himself pretty easily. That's not too big of a threat, especially with like all of the Rat Ogres. So just dealing with what is left on the flanks here. So a nice charge in, as Throt will be able to catch these Black Knights, and yeah, just kind of keeping everything away from those White Kings for as long as possible. They will finish off those Storm Vermin, but at this point, the major threat is just eliminating the mobility game. So once the Black Knights are gone, you're not gonna have to worry too much about things getting like chased off the field. So like specifically the Pit Fighters and like the Plague Priests are probably going to be the biggest like concerns in getting chased off from the Black Knights, and with all these Rat Ogres and Throt just continually just peeling off model after model of these Black Knights, and they are starting to crumble now, so that's going to further compound their plight, as they are just going to getting whittled down bit by bit. They are going to be able to kind of regroup here with their White Kings, as they just kind of get chased back into them. Are going to be getting a charge through the Council Guard, just getting as much free damage as they can. They are able to regain their leadership from that charge, so they do stop their crumbling, as the Pit Fighters and Throt just continually just chase things down, outlasting the Summon of Zombies too, as they do finally dissipate. So it is down to just the Black Knights, as that now everything is just into one big engagement. Plague Priest is going to be coming back, only really needs to try and drain down these Black Knights. I think just keeping it nice and safe, just getting any summons left that it does have will probably be a better use of its abilities than just trying to just get engagement. Though its attack animations do provide a nice little bit of help against the White Kings, able to kind of kick them out of that engagement. Skaven Slaves already kind of wavering as they just engage in melee, though I think Throt at this point will be able to carry very easily, and that is going to be army losses for the Undead, as the Skaven going to be pulling through, or I say that was going to be army losses. There's army losses. Both the White Kings are now going to be disintegrating to the ground, and the Skaven do pull forward in a very, very close series. Very fun matches throughout, but Ondjage will be pulling forward, as he does win in the end with the Skaven. So I'll update the scorecard to show that little fact as well. So he does win 3-2 against lvzdy, a very long series at that. And I'll take a little look at the after battle report as well for the Vampire Counts. Things were looking rather well for them, or at least it was a very swinging balance of power throughout the fight. Initially, it looked very well for the Skaven, because they were getting some nice picks off. They got some nice damage into Heinrich Himmler, into the Blood Knights, doing a lot of damage early on. But then just the massive infantry collapsed upon the Skaven, and really threatened to just outright rout off the entirety of the Skaven forces. But luckily for the Skaven, Throt and the Council Guard in particular were able to stay and hold that line into the end. But if we take a look, the Blood Knights, one of them did okay work. They do cost 1,700, so it really wasn't able to pay for themselves. And this other unit, pretty sure this was the one that got shot to pieces early on by that Warp Lightning Cannon, forcing a lot of the Winds of Magic to be used on healing, and especially a lot of the Winds of Magic healing Heinrich Himmler early on. was definitely some wins that could not be used in other portions of that fight. However, the Black Knights were able to do some nice chasing throughout the engagements, and the Crypto Ghouls did quite well, getting a lot of value between them. 850 on these guys, 950 on them, and even the other guys were able to get some decent value. The Skeleton Warriors were able to get some okay value, and again, just a lot of mass and just, or not mass, but a lot of numbers just spread across the field really made it hard for the Skaven to really hold them back. The White Kings, I mean, they just didn't get a whole lot of value. I only saw like a few of the Scab's Wraith go down, so I'm not really sure if any of them were kind of a little lackluster there. But they were able to provide a little bit of an anchor, and then Heinrich Himmler provided a lot of healing as well. He was able to heal cap himself, and he did survive for quite a long time, so he was able to get a lot of that passive healing off, a lot of that support, and I think the only thing was that Krell really wasn't able to get as much damage off as he wanted to on like the Plague Priest, onto Throt in particular. Throt really did need to take a lot of damage, and as we looked at the end, he had a ton of healing left. He had 2,500 heal cap space left to be had at the end of that fight, so he was not going anywhere anytime soon, especially considering he had all that passive regen anyways. And I think with this vampire counts, I mean, they needed a little bit of mass. When I go with Kendler, I like to bring at least, I think I bring actually 4 Crypt Horrors. So you need some mass to keep him safe, because Throt is a major threat, because Throt has that high speed. He can deal with Kemmler very well. So you need something to hold him back. So I mean, Blood Knights, Crypt Horrors can do that job for him, but otherwise it was a very close and well fought battle though. And then for the Skaven side, the Warp Lightning Cannons getting 2,000 in total damage, so they were able to generate a ton of value against those Blood Knights. Pit Fighters did 1,200, and the other Rat Ogres were not as much. Rattling Guns really just, it was an interesting idea, but I don't think it really provided a whole lot. I think it was pretty much to keep any like Fellbats away from the gun line, just for as long as possible. The Poison Wind Globadiers didn't do a whole lot of damage either. Again, it didn't really have a whole lot of good targets anyways. Really, Blood Knights and the Black Knights would have been the only good targets for it, because everything else was just so cheap. There's just no good target to really get a lot of value out. You're going to be doing pretty much a even spread of friendly to enemy damage if you do get any shots into that front line. However, the Council Guard got 241 kills, 1,500 or almost 1,600 in total value, but just having them around that unbreakable, constantly giving Guardian, that was what was really their main value in this fight. Everything else, not really expected. They did get broken down pretty early on to all those Crypt Ghouls. And then we have the Plague Priest, 1,800 on this guy. All of that just constant drain to all of the mass infantry. And that Plague Priest was a very strong counter to what the Vampire Counts did bring. And of course, we do have Throt, the Man of the Hour, 3,300 total damage, able to do a ton of damage to like Heinrich Kemmler, the Blood Knights, the Black Knights, everything on the field. He was just a menace on the field for the undead, and a hero of the people for the Skaven. But that is going to be it for the series. Ondjage does take it 3-2. He does advance to the next stage of the playoff bracket, and a very fun series at that, and a very long one. Thank you all for staying with it all the way to the end. It was quite the battles to be had, but that is all I have for you today. I do hope you enjoyed the battle, and as always, have a good one.